Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to go ahead and call the July 12th meeting of the Merit Council to order and set the agenda. We have our representative from the Law Director's office is delayed about 30 minutes, so I'm going to ask for an indulgence and adjust the agenda. That way our legal counsel will be here if we have any questions on a couple of items that may have some discussion. So what I would like to do is set the agenda with item C would be moved to the, well, let me not do that way. Okay, we'll do approval of the minutes, then we'll do the job descriptions, then we'll do the motion to propose amendment that's already been written by Mr. Morton. And then we'll do we'll consider the request for a hearing by Mr. Faircloth. And then the last item in the agenda would be the consideration of amendments. Does anybody have any concerns with that? Okay. I need a motion to set the agenda.
I make a motion to set the agenda as you just read.
Second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have a approval of the minutes of the, I believe, April meeting. I need a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passed unanimous. Thank you. Okay, Chief, did you want to discuss the job description, sir?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I'm not exactly sure which ones you have.
Okay,
and-
would it be okay if I just give you the title and then we'll go
Yes,
from
sir.
there? Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll start with the corrections sergeant job description.
Okay, the only thing that we were changing on there, I think the verbiage had indicated that it was the individuals were requiring 2 years of law enforcement experience, and based on the language that we use in the description, we distinguish between the patrol division and the corrections division by utilizing the law enforcement terminology. And so we wanted to clean that up to where there's more continuity with the verbiage that we typically use.
Thank you. Is there any questions for the chief? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion that we approve the corrections sergeant.
Request second.
Second.
Second by Valiant. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So moved. Next item. Excuse me, Chief. Corrections Lieutenant?
That's the same thing, sir.
Okay. Any questions for the chief? Request a motion for approval.
Make
So
a
moved.
motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, call for the question. All in favor? Any opposed? So moved. Thank you. Third item, Assistant Chief of Corrections. Chief?
It's it's the same thing, sir. It was the terminology.
Thank you. Any questions for the chief on this request? Hearing none, request a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Second, please.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, calling for the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. Next item is Forensic Services Technician.
This one, they were changing the nomenclature or classification from civilians and corrections to specifically corrections.
Any questions for the chief? Go ahead, sir.
Does that put this under merit where it wasn't before, or?
I think they were under the merit. This is just changing the classification from being having a little ambiguity there to clarifying the route that it's corrections rather than civilians and corrections.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions for the chief? I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Any second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Next item, Chief, is the medical assistant job description.
This one had a few changes, just broadening out the certifications that are accepted for that particular position. We included some license and some certifications that hadn't previously been included at the recommendation of our health services administrator. And in the past, we had accepted some of these roles, and then we'd sort of deviated from that, and we're just broadening it back out to try to get more people into that position.
Thank you. Any questions for the chief? Mr. Marshall?
I noticed that there had been a change that had occurred earlier today. Is that the same medical assistant?
Yeah, what it was is we had not put or, and the way that the job description read that you had to have all those certifications, and we don't require all of them. We only require one.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Valiant, you had questions, sir?
Yes. I had a question about, I think there was some language that was contradictory originally. I think maybe something to the effect of there was you have to have a medical license in order to move forward in this position, but then there was something saying I think you can practice under a temporary license for 120 days with supervision.
Right, and I have Misty, she's the health service administrator. She can explain to you why we wanted to include that.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. The 120 days for the license, that refers to the RN and LPN position, not specifically for the medical assistant position. It's a stature through the state for a registered nurse and an LPN. They can practice for up to 120 days while they're waiting for their license to come through.
Okay. My apologies on that
No,
one.
that's okay.
I have no further. I will ask the same questions about the RN and LPN then.
Yes, sir. They can practice with a temporary. It's not really a temporary license, but it's a window that they can practice for 120 days.
Sure. So my understanding is they can do that under state law. I guess most of the professional disciplines you can have that time period, kind of that intermediate time period where they can act in that role without a license. I guess my concern is there any concern just from a liability standpoint, is there any concern with the follow-up on that 120 calendar day time period? I mean, if there's any point where they're practicing without their license, and I don't want to call it a temporary license, but outside of that 120-day grace period, is there any concern for, I guess, liability or follow-up? I guess who's in charge of the follow-up if it goes outside of that?
We would follow it to make sure they obtain that licensure within that window. They're still practicing under a medical director, so they're still practicing under that license. They're still considered a practical nurse because they have, they've got a degree. They've got that further education.
Sure.
It's just the licensure that they're waiting for.
So, I guess who specifically, which department is supposed to follow up on that specific piece?
I would keep a copy. I follow all of the licensures, the ones that have expired or fixing to expire. I keep track of all that.
Okay. All right. That's all I got.
Yes, sir.
I got something I want to add to that. It's a clarification, and correct me if I'm incorrect. The 120 days would have to do with, say, if they had just completed nursing school, they had already taken their state boards and they had passed, and there's that lag time before the state actually issues the license. Is
Yes,
that?
sir. Yes, sir. They, the 120 days once they've completed their education, they get an invitation to sit for the NCLEX. So it's actually 120 days from the time they get that invitation. So it starts way before they've ever actually tested.
It's basically a clerical thing. They don't actually have the piece of paper yet.
Correct, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, hearing none, I request a motion.
I would move to, unless there are any other questions about those three, I would move to approve the medical assistant, registered nurse, and licensed practical nurse positions.
I second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, call for the question to approve the motion. All signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The next item is the licensed clinical social worker.
This position, I don't think they were under the merit system. We're bringing them to you to include them. They're a part of our mental health team. There's two positions there. You have the licensed clinical social worker and the licensed master social worker. Several years ago, we moved from contracting that out through Helen Ross McNabb and then other entities after Helen Ross McNabb, and we hired our own personnel. The only person that's on a contract with us is our mental health physician, Dr. Burnside, but these individuals are employed by us, and we're just trying to bring them under the protection and the heading of the merit system.
Chief, was there any change in the working parameters, difference between the contract employee and now that they're going to be?
I don't think there was any changes in any of the description, but they are brand new. I don't think you all had any job descriptions prior to this for them.
Any questions for the chief?
So this is these two are new positions.
They are existing. They're not under the merit system. They are, we hired them, but they are employees that currently do not fall under the protection of the merit system.
So in this, you're not seeking merit protection for them.
We're trying to bring them under the merit system.
Merit system. Okay.
With the, yeah.
Any further questions? Hearing none, call for request a motion for the licensed clinical social worker job description approval.
Move for approval.
Second. I need a second, please.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for the question, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Next item is the licensed master social worker.
And that's the same thing, sir.
Any discussion or questions for the chief? I'd like to have someone entertain a motion, please.
I move for approval.
Need a second, please.
Second.
Any discussion? Call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? So moved. Last job description we have, Chief, is the special counsel.
Yes, sir. That had a few changes. A lot of it was just the verbiage that was used, but the primary changes were in the area under education and training experience. It's now says 5 years experience in representing local government. And then there was also a change that went from a minimum of 15 years to a minimum of 10 years in practice of law. And I think all the other things were typos that were included in there.
Any questions for the chief?
Is this position currently filled by someone?
Yes, sir. This is the special counsel for the sheriff's office. I think Chief Rubel is under that, and I think also we have Randy Nichols is also a special counsel.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the chief?
You said this was an expansion from 5 years in law practice to 10.
Yep. Yep. Well, excuse me, sir, I'm sorry, I answered you incorrectly. It's 10 years of practicing law, 5 years of experience in representation of local government.
But the 10 years was changed from 15.
Yes, yes.
Why was that?
I think that in the preparation for succession planning, they feel like it's going to be much more difficult to acquire someone that's got 15 years of practice and the 5 years of representing local government.
Any further questions for the chief? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
I need a second, please.
I'll second.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, call for the question. All in favor signify by saying aye. Those were included. That's what I used to make that stuff. Motion passed, I'm sorry?
Corrections, Captain.
Yeah, I had sticky fingers. What happens when you, do yard work and then your fingers are numb?
And the
Pardon me?
corrections captain is
Yes,
the same thing.
same.
It was just changing the terminology from law enforcement to experience.
It's very helpful when the other 6 members of the board are keeping me on task, plus the director's looking at me like, what are you doing?
Yes, sir.
So, any questions for the chief regarding this position, job description? I'll entertain a motion, please.
Motion to approve.
In a second. Second. Thank you. Hearing no discussion, call for the question. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. So at this point, I believe we're going to take a recess until Mr. Morton arrives, because I don't want to proceed with the rest of the agenda until we have council in the room. Okay, so we'll take I'm looking at my watch, it's about a 10-minute recess. Thank you.
That he did receive disciplinary action. So when that happens, we do a public records request to the department, and we received back documents regarding those disciplinary actions, which I sent to each of you. So that determination with their background by the rules, if it's not a satisfactory work employment history, then they're typically not placed on the eligibility list.
Any of the members of the board have any questions for the executive director? Does anybody wish to make I'm sorry, go ahead.
Paula, you've also received documentation from the Knox County Sheriff's Department as they looked at this matter, correct?
They did not look at the actual, yes, they have looked at the entire part of the information, but we are told by them that they are not interested in moving forward through the employment process with an applicant if they have resigned during an investigation or pending an investigation type situation.
Thank you.
I won't be entertaining Mr. Faircloth today because it won't be the hearing. That would be part of the hearing. We're just going to decide whether we're going to have a hearing and set the date. So the first thing will be I'll entertain a motion to deny the grievance or deny the hearing of this grievance request. Do I have a motion for that?
Motion to deny the request.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion to deny the request for a grievance hearing? Hearing none, call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So moved. Mr. Faircloth, there will not be a hearing in regards to your grievance request. Next item. Next item is the request for motion to propose amendment to Rules and Regulations 6.1.7. And this is the motion, this is the amendment to remove the language that, and let me read the motion so that you, all of you can understand what I'm talking about. Motion to propose amendments to rules comes the chairman, Christopher Manning, and moves that the Knox County Sheriff's Office Employees Merit System Board of Directors amend our Knox County Sheriff's Office Employees Merit System rules and regulations to no longer allow non-employee applicants an appeal for their non-placement on an eligibility list, and more specifically from Rule 6.1.7, selection of candidates for employment. Knox County Code 42-52 provides the classified service to which the merit system applies includes positions and employees in the sheriff's office, not non-employee applicants. In accordance with the Knox County Code, Section 42-66, the merit system does not create property rights or vested interests in any positions in the classified service. The merit system rules and regs do not allow probationary employees the rights to merit dismissal hearings and appeals. See in parentheses 6C Rule 9.3.4 and Knox County Code Section 42-53F1 provides for the Merit Board to have the power to propose rules and regulations for the administration of the merit system to be submitted to the Commission for approval. Respectfully submitted 9th of May is when I requested this motion to be drafted by the Law Director's Office. Mr. Morton, should I read the rest of this document into the record? Yes, Your Honor. Okay. So the amendment to change the language in 3.2 board member duties changing, oh, excuse me, no, I apologize. I apologize to the board. This is the items that we're going to discuss in the next agenda item, so I apologize for that. So I will request a motion on what I just read regarding the amendment to for the non-placement, or excuse me, non-grievance of non-employees placed on an eligibility list.
I would I would bring forward that the Merit Board submit these changes to the Knox County Commission for their approval.
Do I have a second?
I second it.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Okay, last item on the agenda is consideration of amendments to the Merit System Board of Directors Rules and Regulations. Excuse me. This will be a discussion, and since we haven't properly noticed on an agenda regarding making motions, we'll have a discussion, and we'll hopefully at that end of that discussion, we'll request that the law director draft a motion, and then we'll schedule a meeting August or September, and we'll meet to hear those and vote on those. That everybody concur with that? Okay. So the amendments would be to change the language of 3.2 board member duties, changing the language of political activity and narrow it to political activities surrounding the race for sheriff only. So I would open it up for discussion for any of the members of the council if you'd like to be heard. Mr. Valiant?
So there was a commission education session sometime, probably within the past, easily in the past 60 days, probably in the past 30 days, where commission had requested some more information about the Merit Council and just touched on some things that they that they wanted, I guess, further clarification on, and kind of just a discussion of what we were doing, the things that we've been doing recently. Several attended, commissioners and members of this body attended. And at that time, they expressed, I guess, some discussion points to include, potentially this, that I know Section 3.2 does broadly interpret political activity, saying that and the original purpose of the rule, I believe, was to maintain neutrality on the board in the sheriff's race, because I believe we had at one point, I believe there had been discussed, there might have been an issue where somebody was in a compromising position based on some gear that they may have had at a meeting, and a public meeting. They were supporting at that time, candidate for sheriff. And while I think that there's no issue with that at all, given that this board directly interacts with the sheriff, or works alongside the sheriff, I think that, and acts as a check and balance with the sheriff, I think that really it's probably drafted a little too broadly in the rules. And after doing some research on my side of things, I couldn't find a way to find that constitutional, where you prohibit and narrow down, a volunteer board's ability to participate in political activities of other administrators in the county, other than the sheriff, specifically for, and that one's the most obvious of, there'd be some compromising interests there, but, and I believe at the meeting, I believe the law director David Buke also said that there wasn't a constitutionality issue with changing that language. You want me to discuss the other ones as well?
I'll move on.
Okay.
Just want to make sure. Does any other members of the board wish to comment on this proposed change? I concur with what Mr. Valiant said. I think the First Amendment's pretty clear, and we're all, as Mr. Valiant said, with the sheriff, and if there was a position where you're well, considering that our current sheriff is term limited, it could be quite dicey in a couple of years. So I think it's appropriate that we not be involved in the sheriff's campaigns based on the fact that we interact with staff, and it could get a little sticky. So I thank him for his words. The next.
I've got-
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Marshall. Go ahead.
That's fine. I got something I wanted to add. So as I'm understanding what we're doing is we're taking away that narrow standard that was there as far as controlling our activities outside our merit board of directors' meetings and activities. We're still going to leave into that section where if you decide to run for public office, you must resign from the merit board whenever you make that announcement. We're not changing that portion, correct?
Correct. Okay. Any further comments from anybody? Okay. So I would request, Mr. Morton, if you would make a draft of motion in regards to that, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Next consideration for amendment is to change the language of 9.5, right of grievance to fix a discrepancy. Currently, it states a suspension of longer than 3 days, or where an employee is given cumulative suspension of more than 10 days within any given 6-month period. Currently, the language also states any loss of pay. The problem is a 1 and 2 day suspensions both result in a loss of pay, and based on the text of the rights of grievance section here, it contradicts, or it leaves it out. So an individual who loses 1 or 2 days worth of pay, that's not as painful as 3 days, but it's still painful. And Mr. Valiant and I on separate occasions have expressed our concern with that, because those employees have suffered a loss and there's no redress other than through courts, and we'd rather they be made available, the Merit Council Avenue be made available to those employees on those type of suspensions. So the amendment would be to allow any suspension / loss of pay to be heard by the Merit Council for a request for a grievance hearing. Did I say it correctly? Go ahead.
Yes, on that one, there was a separate but closely related item that I had submitted that we can just discuss in
Okay.
the additional business.
Can we do it last? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions on that request for an amendment?
I have
Okay, Mr. Marshall. Sure.
Should we look at, we have to be careful that we don't interfere with the sheriff's ability to discipline within the department. Would it be appropriate to look at suspensions, loss of pay as a temporary loss of pay, which it is, and therefore give it an exception from the merit board hearing, considering it being a temporary? It could be just 3 days worth of pay. Do we want to set up a whole gamut of hearings and stuff? That's just a question that I have in my mind.
Well, it never is a temporary loss of pay because on your year-end earnings statement, you'll be short 1, 2, or 3 days depending on how, if you compare the years. I'm grateful that an employee doesn't get a 3-day suspension every year, but the point being is it's a loss, and I think the sense of this, the existence of our entity here is to allow employees the opportunity for redress and appeal any loss, any monetary loss as a result of their employment. I mean, that's
I can accept that.
okay.
I'm good.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody? Okay, so hearing no further discussion, I'll request the law director to draft a motion for this, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Third amendment we have is currently the amendment is to change rule in section 2, general policy 2.3 that currently requires employees to take a leave of absence when running for office. Any person holding a position in the classified service which makes the decision to run for an elected position shall request a leave of absence to be approved by the sheriff. Leave of absence request must be submitted no later than the date a treasurer is appointed to the political campaign. This amendment was raised simply because of the financial impact of requesting a leave of absence, no income, so the person, whatever position they're seeking as an elected position, it's quite a financial impact if they decide to do that. May or may not have the best field of candidates based on the income restriction was the conversation. Mr. Valiant, I believe you had additional information on this, sir?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think the biggest concern was there are a lot of really great men and women who, without question, are the most qualified for the position, who serve in the department, and I feel like the way that it's structured currently, it probably deters a lot of those individuals from running. I think it does create a financial hardship that they have to go X amount of time out from an election in order to find employment elsewhere. And then at that point, it almost, I feel like there could almost be an argument that those individuals are detached from the department because of that resignation. And I think an amendment here would probably help keep some of our best employees and encourage some of those best employees to throw their hat in for this type of a position when it opens up.
Any further? Just a personal note from my prior life on the other coast. I did not work for the sheriff's office there, but I'm currently I know the current sheriff, who was a lieutenant on the department and ran a campaign successfully while he was still serving the county in his function as a lieutenant, so he didn't have to take a leave of absence, and it didn't disrupt the good working order of the department that he was working for. So just as I have some experience seeing this, and if there's that conversation about possibly disrupting the work environment, I don't know if that's legitimate, just for conversation. Mr. Marshall?
Yes, I would agree with what, Chairman, what you just said. Do we think that we need, when the law director drafts this, do we need to draw some more perimeters there if we allow this so that it's more defined what activity can take place and what activity can take place? Do we think we need anything additional if we go in that direction?
So I believe,
I will do so.
So, go ahead, John.
I think the Civil Service Law of 19, it's either 77 or 74, would govern some of those provisions, but Knox County never adopted the Civil Service Law of 1974 or 7. I think that I think that we could probably look at that and use it as a guidance potentially, but I don't think we would run afoul of anything surrounding that.
Thank you. I believe there's prohibitions in our rules and regs regarding political activities on duty and in uniform, so that already exists. We may want to consider something that the employee can identify themselves by rank. There's a understanding that the incumbent is an elected position, so that their position by definition is political. So you can't prohibit the sitting sheriff from participating in community events because he is an elected official. So, but there should be probably some language in regards to on-duty versus off-duty activities, uniform versus non-uniform. And I apologize, I can't recall if we have a specific prohibition for, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is it became an issue in a couple of campaigns that I was aware of where photographs were taken of the individual in uniform next to a police or a sheriff's unit, and that was used in campaign literature. So should we have some type of a specific prohibition, understanding that the sheriff is a political elected office? He's not prohibited from that, or she is not prohibited from that, but a candidate is, if that makes, am I splitting hairs here, or do you understand what I'm
I
getting
will
at?
include that in my
Okay.
research.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman.
I think you're right. I think there's some, much of the language that we have adopted under our ordinances reflect the language that was in the Civil Service Act.
Yeah.
And I think we would probably want to, we may want to have a couple of readings on that, because
Sure.
I think there probably would be. I anticipate there are some rules and regulations that are in the rules now that do say, something to the effect of, political activities restricted while on and
Right.
off duty, and I think we would want to be careful. I would, in the same vein though, I think your concern is valid. I worry that, when an individual's campaigning, and let's say an individual has served in, just about every single role you could within the department, and has worked their way up to, a certain point, I would hesitate to strip them of, recognizing, hey, I've in their campaign materials, I feel like they'd have to be able to touch on their experience to some degree.
Agreed, yeah.
I don't know.
Well, here's, not to cut you off, but the only prohibition is you can't identify who you work for. You could say that I'm a law enforcement professional and I've done this job and this job and this job, but you don't identify the department or the office that you work for. And you don't wear the patch that identifies the county you work for. Those negate the affiliation concern. So that's what I'm talking about is, if, for instance, if you're, like you just said, if the person has been with the department for decades, there's a level of public recognition just because of their tenure. So if they're out actually participating in some type of a campaign event, and somebody says, "Oh, you're the whatever rank," with that's that person identifying. You're not identifying yourself. So it's yeah, you're right. I mean, you can't avoid it. It's just so long as it's not initiated by the candidate. Is what my concern is.
I would say that we could have the law director's office see what some of our sister communities have done similarly to this. Instead of us trying to totally reinvent the wheel,
No. Yeah.
Myers could go and come back to us with that information before we actually put stuff down in writing and go to commission.
Okay, that sounds that sounds reasonable. I think Mr. Value made a valid point that we may want to have, maybe not on all these, but on this one specifically, this amendment, we may want to have a second reading on it just to give everybody an opportunity to vet it. And that way it's not exigent, so there's no reason to rush it. So, okay, so the last amendment consideration is 6.1.3, Section H, eligibility requirements, to add that corrections and patrol officers must have a valid driver's license, a valid Tennessee driver's license for those individuals who are required to operate a motor vehicle. And so I'll consider this one first. Okay. So is there any conversation about that amendment? Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious as to why that is required for the corrections position. Or why we,
It's
Chief
still
Purvis, could you come forward, please, sir?
or why it's being requested
Sure.
for that position. I understand patrol, but
Yeah.
corrections I was curious about.
Could you explain, sir, why you would request that corrections employees would need a Tennessee driver's license? There, I got it out.
Yes, sir. All of our employees are required to have a driver's license. At any point in time, a corrections officer may be asked to transport an inmate to the hospital. We usually, probably a mean average within 24 hours is 5 individuals will have to be escorted to the hospital. And in order to do so, they'll need a valid Tennessee driver's license to do that. There are also some other duties that they do with transporting meals, equipment, perimeter checks and such that would also require that they have that Tennessee driver's license.
Thank you. That answered you. Any further questions for the chief? Okay. Could you draft a motion for this, sir? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, the last item I have is, the last amendment is 6.1.7. And this is new language, Director Taylor?
I'm sorry, I passed my information to Myers, so I don't have that in front of me. Let me.
Okay. Yeah, B. is the-
And it wouldn't be changing anything. This was just in reference to Mr. Faircloth. I was just letting you know the
Oh,
rule
okay.
to that.
All right. So we don't have any further business then? Okay. That completes the agenda.
May I?
Yes. Yes, sir.
I want on the record to apologize to this board, the chief, and the audience for being so late. I'm sincerely apologetic.
Thank you. I was remiss at the beginning of the hearing. I wanted to take a moment and introduce our newest member of the board, Brock Gates. Welcome aboard, sir. I appreciate your willingness to step into the fray, so to speak. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
You can address the board if you wish, sir.
I think I'm all right. I appreciate
Okay,
it, though.
thank you. Okay. What we need to do now, last bit of business, is, Mr. Morton, how long do you believe till we could have these draft motions?
A week?
A week? Okay, that's great. I'm not interested in meeting in a week. I'm thinking of probably a month. Is that reasonable, or do we have vacations or out-of-town commitments anywhere in the end of August. So let's look at a date. I think it's going to be incumbent on the calendar for the room. Is that, so do you have access to that, ma'am?
I do not
Okay.
right now. I mean, we have set a couple of rooms we can try to,
Okay.
if you want to come up with a couple of dates or just
Couple
a
of
date and a
dates?
backup.
Okay. And then okay, so, certainly.
Can we,
Okay. Okay. Sure. Okay. Certainly. Is everybody familiar with that app? Okay. So we'll go ahead and, you'll do that. Okay, so sometime around the week of the 15th, okay? Somewhere in there. And is one day of the week better for you, or you're just basically, it's open, okay. All right. And nobody else has any commitments or vacations during that week? We'll just figure out. The second question to that is 1 p.m. convenient, or do we want to, I've brought this up before, but I want to make sure no circumstances have changed. No circumstances have changed that 1 p.m. is still convenient. Everything's bad. Okay, I get it. Okay. Okay, well, if there's no further business from anybody, we stand adjourned. Thank you.